is there any way to guarantee that the Torah in its entirety is true and accurate?
I'm glad that you said true and accurate. I think that that's a really good way to ask the question, because truth and historical verisimilitude or accuracy are two different things. So, for example, what I mean by that is the lessons of the flood may be accurate, may be true rather, even if, in fact, there was not an ark that held two of every animal in the world in one boat. So what I would say is that the Torah is true, but not always factual.
What's the difference?
Because it carries, you look to the Torah for spiritual truth, not for example, scientific accuracy or for necessarily historical accuracy. It wouldn't matter if the route of the Israelites in the desert was somewhat different from what it says, or there weren't actually 600,000 men standing at Sinai, or all those kinds of questions are not, it seems to me, what the Torah is ultimately about. Somebody wants to find a myth, and myth doesn't mean that it's not true, it just means a guiding belief as something that may not have happened but is always happening. And I think of the Torah that way, that it is in some ways deeper than fact. It's truths about the universe and about the human condition and about life. It doesn't matter whether the specific stories, quotations were said exactly as they are depicted in the Torah.
Or why couldn't, if it's such a amazing guidebook, why couldn't it get the little specific details right?
Well, because in part, one of the ways you teach is by telling stories. And the stories that you learn from aren't always identical with life, and sometimes are much more effective when they're told in a certain way. So, and also because I think it seems to me pretty clear that some of the things in the Torah have a much more mythological feel to them, and some of them have a much more factual feel to them. So, for example, the intrigue at the court of David feels much more factual than that, in fact, all of humanity started in a garden with two people.
Right. So some of the concepts are kind of a little bit crazy.
Well, define concepts being crazy.
Like the idea that, like you said, the whole world came from two people in a garden, or that the sea is split, or those kinds of things that are just insanely...
that are very hard to credit as fact, yes.
Right. And those things are not really verifiable.
They're not verifiable. I mean, there's a lot in the Torah that you can't possibly verify that there was a person who lived 3,500 years ago named Abraham who went from Ur Kasdim to Israel. How could you possibly prove that? Even if you found an archaeological record that said something about a guy named Abraham, it's not going to say, and here I am walking, from Ur Kasdim to here. And that's part of the wonder of the Jewish tradition is that it gives space for so much creativity and so much, like the story of Abraham and his father's idols. Why do the rabbis tell that story? Because the Torah doesn't say how Abraham came to God. So it sort of liberates the human invention to be partners with God in creating the tradition.
Okay, fine, but then why follow the whole Torah if not all of it is necessarily true?
Well, we don't follow the whole Torah. Nobody follows the whole Torah.
Well, the rules that apply today.
Right, well, but why is it that, for example, the rule about stoning a rebellious son doesn't apply today? Because the rabbis decided to sort of write that rule out of the Torah. And so my sense is that the Torah is a document in constant dialogue with the people, and that's why you say very naturally the rules that apply today, but the reason that certain rules apply today and certain rules don't is because there has been this dialogue throughout Jewish history. Look at just the question of language, okay? The Torah is written in Hebrew. The Talmud's written in Aramaic. Why Aramaic? Because that's what the Babylonians spoke. And then when Rambam writes his great work of philosophy, Moreh Nevuchim, he doesn't write it in Hebrew and he doesn't write it in Aramaic, he writes it in Arabic because that was the language of the time. So the tradition has always been in dialogue with the world around it.
So are you saying the Torah is like malleable to our perception?
To some extent, yes, but I think that that's going too far. What I would say is that the Torah helps shape the way we look at the world, and then also is in constant conversation with the way we then look at the world having been shaped by the Torah. Because it's clear that when you read the medievals, so they speak in medieval terms. When you read modern, even the most traditional modernist, they speak in modern terms. And the Torah accommodates both, but our dialogue with the Torah does change. Like in medieval times, there wasn't much of an emphasis on identity and the individual, and that everybody's created in the image of God, and therefore everybody has an individual spark. Some thinkers talked about that, but most didn't. But that's because the modern world has placed much greater emphasis on the individual and less on the collective. So what I would say is that it's not an easy one-on-one correspondence, but yes, it goes back and forth.
What makes the Torah true but not any other religious text like Quran or New Testament?
So I don't generally address the truth or not truth of other religious texts. I always tell people it's not my job to argue Judaism's superiority, but its excellence. Because the truth is, I don't really know the Quran very well. I don't know I've read the New Testament and I've read most of the Quran, but I can't tell you. If you say to me, does Judaism believe, for example, that Muhammad was the greatest prophet? I can say no, we do not believe that. But I'm not prepared to say this part of the Quran is true and that part isn't. Instead, I just address myself to Judaism.
So you don't really worry about any of the other religions. But then why do you choose Judaism if you didn't even consider the other religions?
I didn't choose it. It chose me. I grew up as the child of a rabbi. I've been Jewish my whole life. Some people choose it, and you'll have to ask that question to them. But the truth is, for me, it was my destiny. It wasn't my choice. And I think it's a beautiful and wonderful destiny, and that's what I try to convince other people of. And so I have, so this is a little bit, although you're not asking this question exactly, but it leads to, do you try to convince other people that Judaism is true? And my approach is, I want to convince Jews of the truth and beauty of Judaism, and those who are seeking, who don't have another religion. But if somebody is a satisfied Christian or Muslim, I don't have a mission to go tell them why my tradition is true and yours isn't.
But the two religions, or not even two, all the religions, they all basically contradict each other, so...
In some ways, that's true.
So then why wouldn't you want to convince them if there's a clear contradiction?
I want to just explain to them the truth of the world as I see it, but I'm not in a debating contest with all the world's religions. I don't feel like that's my mission, or that that's been a successful endeavor throughout the centuries. I mean, religions have had public debates through the centuries. They're not really open-minded debates, and the only open-minded debate like that I know of is in Yehuda Halevi's Kuzari, and we all know who's going to win that debate because Yehuda Halevi wrote it. So I'm very happy. I've had debates about God, public debates about whether God is real with atheists. I do think making the case for religion generally is important in a secular age, but I don't think that I would. If I was engaging in a dialogue with a Christian or Muslim, it would not be to prove them wrong. It would be to prove the cogency and importance and beauty of Judaism's belief.
What did you tell the atheist that made him think God is real?
It depends on why he doesn't think God is real. So I don't know if there's a generic atheist, but I would say the most important thing is to start making it plausible. Most atheists don't actually find the idea plausible. And once you show them that actually you can reason your way towards God, you don't just, not entirely, but the belief in God is consistent with intellectual disinterest and honesty, I think then you open the possibility of belief. Because ultimately, belief is not a rational act. It's ultimately an existential, emotional act, I think.
But that's not really the highest form of belief, though. But because if your belief is based on logic, then isn't it a higher form of belief?
I don't think so. No.
Why not?
Why, yes. It seems to me that to stake your whole soul on a belief is much more. If you have a logical form of belief and somebody comes up with a different logical argument, so what happens to your belief? But if in fact you have staked your life on this, and this is your existential posture towards the universe, it seems to me both more solid and higher than if it's purely intellectual.
Okay, true, but why would anyone want an illogical form of belief?
I didn't say it was illogical.
But it's not logical.
Not logical and illogical are not the same. If I say I love this person, it's not illogical, but it's not logical. So if you love God, it's not illogical, but it's also not logical. It's love. It's something deeper, I think, ultimately, than logic. I mean, human beings are not logic machines. What we reason has a lot to do with how we approach the world and what our passions are. So our passions tend to undergird our logic.
Okay, fine. Okay, this one's a long one. Free will is a phrase that's thrown around a lot. In my school, it's a more orthodox school, so people often say that we do have free will, and maybe we do. But similar to God, as we discussed earlier, it's not really something that can be proven or verified.
Right.
I jotted down a couple of examples of counterarguments to free will because I had some free time. Okay, the first is Leibotz's study. Benjamin Leibotz's study showed that the brain begins making decisions before we even become consciously aware of them, which suggests that what feels like a choice may simply be our awareness catching up to what the brain has already decided. Also, if every choice we make follows cause and effect, and all our actions are determined by prior events, then free will can't truly exist. Our genes and environment also shape our personalities and decisions, and we don't choose either of those. Psychology adds to this idea, and the 1996 study, Automaticity of Social Behavior, Direct Effects of Trait Construct and Stereotype Activation on Action by Barg, Chen, and Burrows, participants exposed to words associated with the elderly actually walked more slowly afterward without realizing why. Their behavior was influenced by subconscious cues, not deliberate choice or free will, as we refer to it. Even physics raises doubts. In Einstein's theory of relativity, past, present, and future all exist simultaneously in one single block of space-time. If the future is already fixed, then our sense of making decisions may just be how we experience time, not how we shape it. Split brain studies by Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga reveal that after the two hemispheres of the brain are surgically separated, each side can act independently and even make conflicting decisions. So what we think of as a single freely deciding self may simply just be a constructed illusion of unity. Well, that's a lot.
No, I've made all these arguments myself. I think absent a belief in God, it's pretty, I've been saying this for years, it's impossible to hold a belief in free will, I think, if you consider all the factors that you mentioned. The only thing that gives me conviction that human beings have free will is that I believe we're created in God's image. And free will is this sort of mystical endowment that people have. But if you look at it logically and rationally, the fact that you don't choose your environment, you don't choose your genes, and then all the choices follow from that makes it, I mean, there may be randomness in the universe, but free will, I think, is really, really hard to argue without a religious approach.
Yeah. The one argument I heard in support of the idea that we do have free will is from one of my rabbis of Torah. He said that God basically decided he knows all of the infinite possibilities of what we can choose, but it's still technically our choice. He just knows, he doesn't know what we will choose, but he knows all the possibilities of what we could choose.
So that's not an argument in favor of free will. That's an argument against God's foreknowledge being an argument against free will. Right? That's not the same thing as arguing that we have. It's not an argument for free will. It's just saying God's foreknowledge doesn't prevent our having free will, which is a different thing. So that's actually, I think it was Gersonides in the Middle Ages said something very brilliant and beautiful. He said, God, not knowing that which doesn't exist is not a limitation on God's omniscience. So God can't know a unicorn, because unicorns actually don't exist. And it's not a limitation on God's omniscience to say God can't know something that doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. So God's not knowing the future isn't a limitation on God's omniscience. Of course, Einstein's past, present, future might contradict that, but at least in this scheme, where time is linear, it's not a contradiction to say that God doesn't know the future, even though presumably God knows all the odds of what people would choose.
Yeah, it's really difficult to say God knows everything, but he doesn't know what you're going to do.
Yes, that is true. Look, this goes back to Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Akiva says that. Hakol tzafui v'harashut netunah. Everything is foreseen, but free will is granted, which maybe as far as anyone can get with this paradox.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the paradox of, can God create a rock that he can't lift?
Right, same thing, which is a kind of logical contradiction. And the only thing you might be able to say is, yes, he can, but you can't understand it. I don't know. I mean, I think those kinds of things are fun for us to play with, but they remind us how little we actually could possibly know of what God's workings are.
But why would God want us to be in the dark and just be so ignorant?
Depends why you think we're created.
Well, why do you think we're created?
To grow in soul. I think we're here so that we can return our souls to God better, deeper, wiser than we were given. And in order to do that, you have to have a world in which there's a lot of darkness and some pain and struggle and all the things that we don't want.
So then the entire point of our existence is just to be more close to God, I guess?
That's one way of growing in soul, yeah. Probably the most powerful way, but not the only one.
So and the way you do that is by following the Torah?
That's the way Jews do it, yes. That's the way. But there are a lot of ways to grow in soul. So I would say, like, somebody in China who never heard of the Torah, who grows up and ends up being a kind, caring, giving person, is also growing in soul. I don't want to suggest that there are no other ways to grow in soul in the world, but that's certainly the way that we were given.
Okay, but why do we have to speculate what God wants? Why didn't you just say it?
Well, he does. God says that in the Torah, right? He wants you to go and walk in my ways and to follow my laws and so on and so forth. So we do have a sense of what God wants.
No, I mean, why doesn't it say it nowadays?
Why doesn't God talk anymore? I don't know. I mean, the best answer that I know is the parenting answer. You know, that when a kid is little, so you walk with them every step of the way and you constantly guide them and you make sure that they don't, pick up the dirt and put it in their mouth. But at a certain point, if you're a good parent, you step back because they have to grow on their own and make their own mistakes. I think that I could imagine the analogy being that God says, like, human beings basically know. I mean, there's nobody in the world who doesn't know that peace is better than war, that kindness is better than cruelty, that love is better than hate. We all know this. The question is, will we do it?
Why do we have to suffer just because Adam ate from the tree like 6,000 years ago?
I don't think that's why we suffer. I have a different theory of why people suffer. I think suffering is random. I think all this... The one thing, there's a statement that you find often in Jewish tradition that I think is palpably untrue, which is, if you follow the mitzvot, you'll be fine, and if you don't, you'll suffer. And we all know that's not true. The rabbis knew it wasn't true. Tzaddik v'ralo. There's a righteous man who suffers. So the question is, why is there suffering in the world that is not alleviated by doing mitzvahs? One answer, of course, is olam haba, that, you may suffer in this world, but you won't in the next. But I'm going to give you a slightly different answer, which is the only way to be good is to be good without knowing the consequence. That is, if every time you steal, you get a disease, you'll never steal. But why won't you steal? Not because you're a good person, but because you don't want to get a disease. But if you know that actually suffering is random in this world, and you can be a good person and still suffer, then your goodness is real goodness. You're not doing it because you want to get rewarded. You're doing it because you believe in goodness, and that's being a moral person.
Well, then why do we have systems of, law enforcement And like, why?
Because as humans, I'm not talking theologically, as humans, we want to try to maximize social order. But I'm talking about, why did God create a world in which, even if you follow all the laws, you can still be a rotten person, right? You can be a good citizen and a rotten person. So the question is, why is there a world in which suffering exists? And that's the only reason that I think makes sense to me.
Which is because he wants us to choose it.
In order to choose goodness. In order to actually have a free choice of goodness.
Well, how is it a free choice if, like you said, it's destiny?
Well, it's not destiny whether you'll choose goodness or not. That's where free will and free choice comes in.
Wait, so you're saying free will is, it does exist?
Oh, yeah, I believe in free will, but I believe in free will because I believe God gives it, not because I believe you can make a rational argument for it.
So why would you believe God gives it if there's no rational argument?
Because the entire tradition and everything I understand about God and human life argues for it, in my mind.
Okay. This one's tough. Well,
those weren't. those were already tough. I'm not getting any easy questions here.
Okay, why didn't God just decide to make Adam Jewish? Why did the covenant have to begin with Abraham?
So here again, I think that question only makes sense if you take Adam literally. I don't. I take Adam symbolically. So symbolically, the whole idea of the Torah is that human beings are created generically, and then in time, the lesson of history is that being a particular kind of human is the path to betterment. That a human being in general, I've never met a human being in general, I mean, everybody's a particular kind of person, that's actually the fate of humanity, is to learn how to live with what Rabbi Sachs called the dignity of difference.
But, okay, fine, so you're saying Adam he didn't actually exist, he was just a symbol.
Right.
That doesn't really make sense. That's kind of contradictory to everything I've ever learned.
Well, those are two separate statements.
Yeah.
That it doesn't make sense and that it's contradictory to everything you've ever learned are two different statements. But don't forget, you're asking a conservative rabbi, not an Orthodox rabbi.
That's true, yeah. But no, I guess in my mind, it doesn't make sense because it's contradictory, and that's not a rational argument. It just kind of goes against what I've learned. But, so, did Abraham exist then?
I think it's likely that there was someone very much like Abraham if Abraham's story is not literally accurate. Yeah.
But you think Moshe did write the Torah? Well, Hashem wrote the Torah, but Moshe...
I think the Torah was written gradually over time.
So not all at once at Har Sinai?
Not all at once at Har Sinai, because, I mean, among other things, so Moses wrote down that Korach was going to rebel and still was surprised by it later. I don't get that. Moses wrote down that he was going to hit the rock, and then years later he hit years later he hit the rock. Why didn't he say, you know what, now that I wrote it down, I think I'm not going to hit the rock? No, it seems to me the Torah was a gradual development over time, and that it was changed and edited and created, that it's a sort of divine human collaboration.
But you think it was all written by Moshe?
No, I think it was written over time. I don't think it was all written by Moshe.
By how many people?
I couldn't tell you because I think, like any document, it shows signs of editing and of refinement and of changes, and so I think the core of it goes back to Sinai, but I don't think all of it does.
What specific event made Abraham Jewish? Was it when he accepted the covenant, or when he started proselytizing people to become more spiritual?
I think you could make the argument either way, but I see much more process than event in these things. That is, I don't know if there was a moment, like 5 minutes before Abraham wasn't Jewish and 5 minutes after he was. I think the gradual recognition that there's one God and that God has an ethical concern in human beings, that sort of recognition, because that is the greatest innovation that Judaism brought to the world, is if you look at the codes of ancient gods, they don't care how people treat each other. They only care how people treat them. But the recognition that Judaism had was, no, that the creator of the universe cares how we treat one another. And that, I think, that's Abraham's recognition of that in some ways made him, that the moment that recognition dawned on him, or dawned on him and Sarah, that was the moment of, Jewish awakening.
Does God care how we treat him or just other people?
Both. There are mitzvot ben adam l'chaveiro and ben adam l'makom. So between us and God, and between us and each other. But I think of the two, I hesitate to speak for God, but I think of the two, if you said to God, which one do you care more about? I think it would have to be ben adam l'chaveiro, because we're fragile and God's not. I can't hurt God, but I can hurt you. You can hurt me. So I think of the two, I think God cares more how we treat one another, and that treating a human being with dignity helps lead you to God.
So when a person, if a person's not born Jewish and they want to convert, there's no specific event that, there's not one thing they can do that makes them Jewish. It's just a gradual process.
Well, they have to study. We know how people convert to Judaism. They have to study. They have to go through, if they're male, they have to go through Milah and Brit Milah and a mikveh. And so there is a moment at which we call them Jewish, but it's the culmination of a process. It's not all of a sudden you aren't Jewish and then you are Jewish. It is, just like getting married. There's a moment where you're not married and then you are, but it's also the culmination of a process.
Yeah, so what specific moment makes someone Jewish?
Today? Mikveh and the bracha for conversion.
So
or unless you're born Jewish, of course. Yeah.
Does Judaism view theocracy as a utopia, and is that what the religion envisions if and when the Messiah returns?
I would say that, yes, classical Judaism views theocracy that is messianic as a utopia, but it does not view theocracy before the Messiah comes as a utopia. So in this unredeemed world, you don't want a theocracy, because what you get instead of God's will is people who claim they know God's will. And that's a very dangerous kind of rulership, as we see all throughout the world when there are people who rule claiming they know God's will. So I'm more than happy once the Mashiach comes to actually submit to whatever God's will is, but I'm not at all prepared to do so from people who are self-proclaimed bearers of God's will.
Isn't that what Scientology is all about?
Not only Scientology, there are a lot of theocracies in the world, right? There are Islamic theocracies. There are some sort, there are people who want to impose Hindu theocracy. There have been Christian theocracies throughout history. So yeah, it's I don't know the ins and outs of Scientology well enough to tell you, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Do you think that would be worse than living in a world governed by AI?
So AI is a really both fascinating and frightening prospect. You're asking me about two things, neither of which we can possibly know. So I'd be foolish to pronounce on it definitively one way or the other. And I think a lot of it depends on whether AI can be given a direction before it becomes so powerful that human beings are no longer able to direct it. That is the problem of what's called alignment. If it is possible to align AI in ways that will ultimately redound to human benefit, then we have a shot at having a better world with AI than without it. But that's a very open question.
Yeah, I saw this one, it wasn't really a documentary, it was like a 45-minute video on YouTube about AI, and it was about a study that predicted that within 20, 30 years there's going to be a war between America and China over AI. So that was
well, I don't know if it would be over AI, but I could see it being started by AI.
No,
I could see AI doing it.
Yeah, it was because it'll keep getting more and more advanced, and then they'll just compete so much, and eventually get so competitive that it just culminates in war.
It's a frightening prospect. So,
Okay, someone I'm pretty close with told me recently that the point of asking all these questions is not to actually get an answer, but just to sort of go through the process of trying to figure it out. And I agreed with him at the time, but I've been thinking about it for like the last 2 weeks, and I think I actually really disagree with him. The reason is because it's not really productive to ask questions you don't want to get the answer to. It's kind of also, especially Jewish school, it takes up a lot of time, like 8 hours a day until 5 p.m. So time is pretty limited. But it's just like I don't have time to ask questions that it's not going to get an answer to.
So let me reframe it slightly. The point is not to get an answer that is definitive and final, and now it's good, I've got the answer, I don't have to worry about it. The point is to grow in the depth of your reflection on something, and now you have that answer in the bank too. So when you think about these questions, you have, it could be this, could be this, could be this, could be this. I have a much better sense of, I tell people sometimes, like, I used to think when I got older, what would happen is I would have the answers. And what really happens, I think, and you'll have to ask other people if they feel this way too, I think the puzzle gets bigger. That is, you see more pieces. And that's what wisdom is. Wisdom isn't having the answers, it's in understanding the puzzle and the questions and the possible answers and the way they affect your life better. So I think that it is just part of the journey to be a deeper, broader, more informed human being, but nobody comes to the end of their life and goes, wow, now I've got all the answers, I can die, I'm good.
Is it against Judaism to enlist in the military?
I hope not. I don't think so.
Not like the IDF, like the United States military.
I think you could live a committed Jewish life and be a member of the military, yeah. I actually spoke at West Point to the Jewish graduates this year, and some of them are like serious Jews, and they want to serve their country, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I was thinking about joining the Air Force, but a lot of people at my school are opposed to the idea, which is kind of surprising, actually.
Yeah, I think it is surprising. I think like you could do a lot of good. And I think that's a kind of role model that would be very good for the United States, to have people who are from in the military.
Do you think there's a larger anti-Israel sentiment than there was, say, a decade ago?
Yes, no question about it.
Why?
Partly because of the Gaza war, and partly because I think as you get further from the Holocaust, people feel more free to express anti-Semitic sentiments than they used to. And also I think because of the influx of people from the Middle East who grew up with anti-Semitism being part of what they learned as children, and as they moved to the West, some of their beliefs were spread in the West as well.
Are there too many Muslim immigrants going to Europe?
I would say this. To the extent that Muslim immigrants in Europe don't assimilate to the prevailing culture and express beliefs like anti-Semitism that I think are really antithetical to the ideals of the West, it's a real cultural danger that is now become pretty apparent across Europe. To the extent that Muslim immigrants both do assimilate and do espouse Western values, they're incredibly important because they're the ones who have the best leverage to move the Muslim community to Western values that exist right now.
What do you think of Ben Shapiro?
We're friendly. I mean, we've always had a good relationship.
No, I mean like his political opinions.
Some I like and some I don't like. I try not to like broad brush. There are a lot of things I agree with him about. There are some things that I don't agree with him about. I can give you an easy one: same-sex marriage.
So you're in support of it?
I'm supportive of it, and he's not. And we've talked about that. He's not crazy about my view on this.
Why?
Because he's opposed to it.
No, I mean, why do you support it?
Because It's because when someone comes to me and says, as has happened, look, there is only one kind of person in the world that I can love in a full sense. And you're telling me that although I was made that way, and I've always had that consciousness as long as I had any consciousness of sexuality at all, so I think that God made me that way. You're telling me that there's no space in the tradition to sanctify my love? I can't say no, there's no space. I don't see any reason why there shouldn't be.
Well, the Torah is against it.
The Torah is against it. So there are two, I'll make three separate points about that. One is the Torah actually doesn't say you shouldn't be homosexual. What it says is a man shouldn't sleep with a man like a man sleeps with a woman. That's susceptible of lots of different interpretations. That does not necessarily say, therefore, two gay people shouldn't get married. Second, there are a lot of things in the Torah that the Torah is against that we totally ignore. You're supposed to kill Shabbos breakers. You're supposed to stone rebellious children. But the only thing, for some reason, that people make a huge deal of is the same-sex marriage thing. And that leads me to think that it has a lot more to do with our psychology than it does with the Torah. And the third is our recognition of social places and social positions change. Look at the position of women in the world. Very different from what it was in the Torah. And so I think we're being intellectually dishonest when we say, actually, we accept everything that the Torah says about social positions of various people. We've learned a lot about human psychology and learned a lot about the way people function. And I think that that should be part of the tradition as well, especially because Kvod HaBriot, which is the dignity of human beings, is a huge principle in the Jewish tradition. And I don't see how you dignify a human being when they say, I want to sanctify my love, and you say no.
Wasn't there a big scandal at Yeshiva University over a gay club or something?
I think there was, but I don't know the details.
So, do you think gay people should be able to have kids?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Why?
Why not?
Because doesn't the Torah support the idea of a nuclear family of one man and one woman raising a child?
Nowhere in the Torah that I'm aware of it does it say, and therefore 2 men or 2 women shall not raise a child. Right? And the question is, what are the children like who are raised by 2 men and 2 women? I know a number of children who've been raised by 2 men and 2 women. They're wonderful human beings, and some of them very committed Jews. So, yeah, I do think so.
Have you ever met an Orthodox Jew that's gay?
Sure, a number of them.
Really?
Some admitted, some not.
What do you think about transgenderism? Is it the same thing as with the gay, that they should...
I think transgenderism is a really complicated issue that I know is very hot button, and I don't have, I feel as though I should know much more about it before I pronounce on it. So, to me, the one thing that I will say is that it seems to me that it is probably a rarer phenomenon than the public discourse about it would lead you to believe. But I don't really study it or understand it very well, so I don't have, a hot button view.
That's the thing with the election cycle last year in 24. The 2 biggest issues, or at least seemingly the 2 biggest social issues, were transgenderism and abortion, and that affects 5, maybe 10% of the entire population of America. So it's crazy.
Right.
What do you think of Trump?
I try to stay out of politics. So if you want to ask me about specific questions or policies or so on, I'll be happy to tell you. I think that his personal conduct is something that anybody who believes in the conduct, that conduct should meet a certain standards, has to disapprove of. That's certainly true. If we're talking about his policies, you have to ask me specifically this way or that way. And I would say the same thing if you ask me about Biden. I don't want to make public. I'm happy to talk personally about how I feel about that. But the problem is once you make public pronouncements, then you're in camp A or camp B. And as a rabbi, I don't think that that's my best positioning.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of Orthodox rabbis are very conservative, but it gets more nuanced as you get, not as Orthodox. So,
being very conservative, by the way, and thinking Trump is a good person are two very different things. And you didn't ask me, am I conservative? You asked me, do I like Trump? And when somebody is, when somebody not only is his personal conduct is something that he publicly talks about and even brags about in ways that clearly contradict every norm of I would say, Torah conduct, I think you can easily say, I don't think that he's a model that people should aspire to follow.
Yeah, I respect that. I think more rabbis should stay out of politics.
Yeah. I do too.
Yeah,
I do too. I don't like the idea that you say I go to this synagogue because it's pro-Trump or anti-Trump or Democrat or Republican.
Yeah.
I wish Jews would. The only place where I won't stay out of politics is Israel. I don't have a problem with Israel politics because I feel like that's a fundamental Jewish principle. But
yeah, it's like I could tell you every synagogue in Los Angeles, whether they're more left or right leaning.
Yeah. Right, and that's a shame.
Yeah, kind of. So I'm actually out of questions.
That's right. That's good. That means that we've covered at least all. I think you asked tremendous questions and not easy ones, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, there we go.